Over the course of 1,000 days, I've accomplished a lot in my steampunk world. From grand airships to super vaults, from a chocolate factory to the Titanic. And these are just a few of the things I've made over the course of these last months. With the power of Create Mod at my side, there is nothing we can't accomplish. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and join me as we explore the progress I've made, because in today's video, we're surviving another 1,000 days in the Modpack Steampunk Minecraft. You want to play mod packs with friends, but you can't seem to find a good server. And the free ones? With the big mod packs these days, free servers are just too laggy. Luckily for you, there's BISECT hosting. They host my server, and with plenty of affordable options, they can host your server too. And the best part is, they support almost every mod pack. Use code Doublesal at checkout for 25% off your first order. BISECT hosting, a great site for great servers. The holidays are over, which means it's time to get back to work. Through its machines, the steampunk world is always moving forward, but it can't do that without andesite alloys. And how do you make andesite alloys? With an andesite block. So logic dictates that we need an andesite factory, but where to put it? I also have a second problem I want to address. Pickaxes and axes. These tools are starting to look like baby toys. At this point, there's got to be something better that we can work with. And there is. A power drill, one that can break multiple blocks at a time. But to make this, I'm gonna have to do some heavy crafting because this machine requires a lot of parts. Even ingots, and all of my ingots were gone because I had updated the mod pack, and the modded chests where I was storing them all, well, they were removed. So once again, I had to hop into the airship, fly around, and look for a cave. I hovered around for a few minutes until I came across this ravine. Thanks to the blimp, I was able to descend directly to the bottom. It was a bumpy landing, but she held together. And after that, I began mining all the ores and gems I needed, as well as repelling the mobs that would just get in my way. So once I had what I needed, I went back to base. My next stop was the power station, where we had built a diesel generator. I was gonna need a lot of power to start smelting my ores. Once it was powered on, I went back to the workshop and started using the arc furnace, the ultimate furnace that could smelt multiple ores at a time. Not only could it melt them down, but it could also mix them. With this machine, I combined gold and silver to make electrum, the required ingot for our power drill. And there it was. But I wasn't done yet. I had just crafted the base model. I still needed to make the drill head as well as some other add-ons that would make it more powerful. There were a couple of drill options, but I opted for steel as it was the strongest. The only way to actually apply these add-ons was at the engineer's workbench. There I was able to attach the drill head. After that, I crafted a large fuel tank and a couple of other add-ons that would make this the ultimate power drill. There was only one thing left to do, and that was to fuel it up. It ran on biodiesel, just like our generator. I put the drill into the refining machine where it sucked up all the fuel. With the power drill now fueled up, I decided to test it nearby, and wow, this thing was going to be very useful. I wanted to push it to its limits, so I found a nearby hillside and began flattening the terrain. I even contemplated if the area that I was working on could act as a potential site for our andesite factory. With this powerful tool, I thought to myself, why not? So I decided to take out the entire hillside. In no time, I was able to clear up a good chunk of this area. There were some holes in the ground that I had to patch up, but not too big of a problem there. I did have a ton of dirt in my inventory. This flat area was going to be the perfect spot for building anything that I wanted. Now the big question was, what was this andesite factory going to look like? I mean, how big was it going to be? I decided to hop over to my creative world to design something that would suit our needs. And after a lot of time building, I think it's safe to say I designed something that would be perfect for our world. I also incorporated new blocks that I had never used before, like the display board, but more on that later. Yes, we were going to take our engineering to the next level, and to transfer our world from creative to survival, I had the help of the trusty schematic cannon, a block that constructs your building for you. And of course the cannon needs a table. How else are we supposed to draft our plans? I imported the blueprints from the creative world, and after that, I had to decide where I wanted to place this building. I set down a preview of the building onto the flat plane that I had just made with the power drill, though I didn't really like how it looked in that spot. The second option was the space that was used for our tree farm, though the tree farm could easily be relocated. I felt like I needed a building here, although I would have to demolish some things like Noah's Christmas tree, which he built on a live stream. Here's a clip from around that time in case you missed it.
This gift is specially pertaining to you. I put a lot of thought into it, okay? I am going to give you this light bulb because I think you're very bright.
Aw.
There you go.
Oh, hey.
What'd you get me?
You're a desolate. I got you a couple things. It's kind of like a package deal, okay? So first, each...
But Christmas is over, so the tree has to come down. And what better use of a spot full of cherished holiday memories than by placing down an industrial factory? I mean, that is the best way to get use out of the land. And besides, I wasn't doing anything with it. I put the blueprints into the cannon only to realize that it had no gunpowder. So I was gonna have to go on an expedition to get some. I used the 4 little pieces of gunpowder that I had left to make some bullets. With these supplies, I was gonna have plenty of gunpowder in no time. I flew around on the airship, hoping to find some nice gunpowder deposits. And that didn't take long. It turns out that there was a surplus of creepers in my area. What one would consider a curse, I considered a blessing. But killing creepers one at a time was taking way too long. Thankfully, I did have a tool that could help me remedy that issue. It only took a few minutes before I had more than enough gunpowder to power this cannon. The next step was to prepare all the materials that were going to go into the build. There were going to be a lot of logs, a lot of sandstone, and how exactly did I know what I was going to need? Well, the cannon made a list for me. Every item with the exact quantity. With a chest full of supplies right next to the cannon, it started doing its thing. You know you've made it in Minecraft when the blocks are building for you. Eventually, a foundation appeared, but I did have to start crafting some of the more unique additions to this build, like these futuristic sliding doors. They look like something you'd see in a space station. While I wasn't going to space just yet, I felt that these doors were the perfect fit for our Andesite factory. We were finally transitioning to a more industrial, technological age, and it was time for our builds to start reflecting that. So I continued crafting new technologies like the display board, a block that when powered can display the names and quantities of an item, for example. I put these iron ingots on a depot. All I had to do now was to power the display board, and once it received that power, the name Iron Ingot was projected onto the board. Granted, the board did have to be a little longer, but it worked. There are so many useful applications for something like this. Because it updates in real time, you can even set it up to display train schedules. But today, we're just going to use it to measure how many items we have in a chest. You can even customize it so that the letters appear in your favorite color. While I was experimenting with the display boards, the schematic cannon was making progress. And after a short while, it was finally done. The Andesite factory was nearly complete. Another acacia masterpiece. Keeping true to our steampunk style, this building was going to be powered by another hidden steam engine. And as you can see, there is the larger, glorious display board just waiting to get started. And of course, you cannot forget our futuristic sliding doors. Here on the upper level, you may notice that mounted on the walls are train pilots, or cow catchers, whatever you want to call them. I thought they looked really fancy, especially acting as light covers. Stashed away inside of the Andesite factory was a name tag. Now, what was I going to do with this name tag? Well, obviously, I was going to name something. I typed out the words Andesite alloy, and I was going to right-click those little Nixie tubes, you know, the little light bulbs displaying 0. Well, they can actually display letters as well, and they make the perfect steampunk signs. Once you right-click them, the letters are displayed, and there you go. Anyways, an andesite factory needs lava. So I went to our little lava farm and started connecting pipes that would reach from the farm all the way to the factory. We also needed lava for a cobblestone generator, because all great things start with a cobblestone generator. Now to some of the behind the scenes action. Behind this wall you'll see the guts of the factory, where all the real work happens. I'll go a little more in depth on that later. As you can see, the display board is working, although for some reason, I don't know why the upper line is more indented than the lower line. But when the letters reappeared, the upper line was still more indented. I did want the letters to pop out a little more, so I tried something new. I took some soulfire, threw in an ink sac, and watch. It turns into a glowing ink sac. I then took the glowing ink sac, right-clicked the letters, and now they were glowing. That pops out way better than the dull white. I ended up dyeing the lower line blue, light blue to be specific, just to make the labels color-coded. With that task out of the way, I spent a little time working on the cosmetic side of this factory. The Andesite factory was finally incorporated into our steampunk village. Here's how the factory works. It all begins with the cobblestone generator. The cobblestone is made, it gets broken by the drills, and then it falls between a pair of crushing wheels. The blocks are ground up and turned into gravel, which can end up in one of two places. The first being a millstone, which will continue to ground up the gravel and turn it into flint. The gravel can also end up in a chest, which is also used to make andesite later. When the ingredients are pressed with lava, it makes an andesite block. The block then moves to a mixer where it's combined with iron nuggets. When the two items come together and are mixed, they produce an andesite alloy. The alloy then has one of two paths it can follow. They pass through a set of filters which splits them off into two separate sections, with each section processing the andesite alloys a little differently. One option is for the andesite alloy to be combined with stripped logs. When the two items come together, they form an andesite casing. The alloys that aren't combined with the log are put into a vent and elevated to the second floor. In the end, both the alloys and the casings end up side by side, and for every item that goes into the chests, the display board automatically updates its quantity. Now there are some drawbacks, like the fact that I have to constantly supply this machine with iron nuggets. I mean, I could have made them with this method, but there's only a 12% chance to actually get the iron nugget and a 25% chance to get the flint. I really would rather just transfer the iron from the iron farm into the factory and just have the flint generated 100% with a millstone. Don't worry friends, we're almost done. There is one more thing I want to add to this factory before we wrap it up. I crafted wool, turned it into a painting, and with the painting I combined it with a crafting table. This generates a crafting blueprint. It's kind of like a painting but way more useful. Now the big question, how exactly does a crafting blueprint work? And how can it help us here in our steampunk world? When you right-click it, you're greeted with an interface similar to that of a crafting table. And like a crafting table, you can put down the ingredients and it'll show you what you can make. The difference is that this one can actually memorize the recipes and leave them there for instant crafting. The blueprint then displays an image of the item you saved based on the crafting recipe you put down. If you have the items in your inventory, all you have to do is right-click it and there you go! You have instant crafting. Now the blueprints aren't an absolute must, but they do look nice and they save you a little bit of time. I figured they'd be nice to have since we can craft some of the more simple create mod items with the materials that we were making in the factory. It was finally time to get some practical use out of this andesite factory. With all of the stuff we were now able to make, I decided it was only appropriate to start upgrading something across the street, that being our iron farm. You see, the iron farm was great, but it did have some drawbacks as well, like the fact that it would only make nuggets and I would have to spend a lot of time combining the nuggets to make ingots. But with all of the materials we now had at our disposal, it was finally time to automate that process. With our newly crafted items fresh from the andesite factory, I began making some upgrades to the iron farm that were really way overdue. And yes, the process was slow. Very slow. But as long as the job was getting done automatically, it wasn't going to be a problem, with the nuggets being pressed into ingots, and I had to deal with the issue of getting them from the basin into a chest. So I set up a small conveyor belt system. And honestly, when it comes to create, this is as simple as it gets. Nothing too complicated, nothing too fancy, just a well-working machine that gets the job done. With the funnel attached to the chest, the items can now freely move from the basin onto the belt into their new storage space. And with that, I successfully upgraded the iron farm. It seemed like a pretty obvious thing to have, so I don't know why it took me this long until I decided to make an andesite factory. I mean, after all, like I said before, andesite is the fundamental block for almost all of the create blocks. Well, there you go, friends, the andesite factory. It just occurred to me that our airship is, well, you know, kinda small. And while it gets the job done, I can't help but feel that there's something better we can use. And there is. I added something new to our steampunk world. The Eureka mod is something special, because it can add actual physics to your builds, which is useful for vehicles. And the first step to getting a vehicle is by crafting an oak helm, which is essentially the brain of your blimp or boat. Whatever it is you're making, you need a helm to steer it. Now, seeing how this is my first time using this mod, I decided to try something small. A little water raft, just to see if this is gonna work. All you have to do is click the helm, press assemble, and boom! Your build comes to life. You see how the raft is just bobbing in the water? That is amazing. Now don't be fooled by its jittery movement. That was just simply because I was too close to my create mod factories. The further I got away, the smoother the ride got. And I'm not gonna lie, it does take some time to get the steering down. It's not perfect, but when you're able to figure it out, it's so fun. But it was time to stop messing around, so I waved goodbye to my first boat and began making plans. I was gonna need a lot of balloons. The balloons could make your vehicles float, but they weren't very fast unless you had an engine. Things were about to get real interesting. I ran back to the raft to start making some much needed modifications to that sad piece of driftwood. I began by placing balloons on the sides, and as soon as I did that, the platform, it began to float. I got out of the water, hopped onto the raft, and began placing balloons on the other side. With the raft finally being balanced with balloons on both sides, it was time to make my ascent. Although I couldn't go too high without an oxygen tank, so that was one thing I had to be mindful of. But anyways, I call this prototype Magic Carpet, and yes, I just came up with that right now. I wanted to keep experimenting with a Eureka mod, so I crafted an engine, attached it to the back, and it basically doubled the speed of the platform. By the time I had descended back to the ground, I finally fully understood the potential of this mod. The things I could build, the possibilities were limitless. I began reshaping the raft to resemble that of a boat. I was gonna build your traditional steampunk airship, but before I could do that, I wanted to make a prototype. Now you're gonna have to cut me some slack. You see, boats and balloons, they both have round surfaces, and when you're playing in a game of cubes, it is difficult to recreate those round surfaces. But I digress. Our main goal was to see if this thing was actually gonna work. Up until now, we had just built platforms. Does the Eureka mod have what it takes to move actual structures? The answer is an astounding yes. Once again, we had liftoff, only this time we weren't flying on some magic cardboard. This was an actual airship. Well, it was more of an airboat, but you get the idea. I took the airship back to the main base and made a proper landing at the airport. Now, here is the main goal for this video. That airship that we just made, like I said, it was a prototype, a much smaller version of something I want to make. But before I could build it, it only seemed right to extend the runway. Now, airships don't need runways, but regardless, this thing was going to be huge and it needed a place to land. Thankfully, I had the power of my mining drill to clear out all the dirt. Now that I had finally extended the runway, it was time to build the platform where you could actually board the airship. So, I quickly threw something together made out of acacia logs and wood slabs. But I got carried away, and all of a sudden I found myself constructing these massive towers. Now, my subconscious was probably thinking that if this airship is truly going to be as big as I think it will, then they're going to need towers. The passengers are going to need a means of actually getting up there. But the bridge was way too high up for the average person to climb, so we were going to have to invent something new, something groundbreaking. We were going to invent the elevator. Now, in the past, we'd use a rope pulley. Now, there is a brand new elevator block. It covers all of the elevator essentials. Traveling from floor to floor, having automatic doors open. There's even a way to get it to travel from whatever floor you want, simply with the push of a button. I began crafting the essential components for the elevator block. The block itself, along with some of the connectors that allowed it to travel between floor to floor. It did require a few items, but in the end it was gonna be worth it. It makes life so much easier. You'll see what I mean when we install it. But anyways, I began building a simple elevator cage. It wasn't anything spectacular, just a simple lift to get us from point A to point B. Now, once all of the blocks were set in place, the only thing left to do was to bring it all together by using glue. Once the glue had attached all the blocks and they were fused into one structure, it was simply a matter of figuring out how to get it lifted up to the next level. That was a little tricky, but I was eventually able to figure it out, and when I did, well, just watch this. Wasn't that amazing? I love when things work the first try. And guess what? The elevator not only goes up, but it also goes back down. Yes, friends, it's the little victories that make this Let's Play the fun experience that it is. Anyways, now that the elevator was finally working, it was time to make a very nice exterior. And check this out. I go into the elevator, I open the door, close the door, but it stays open, I press the button, and it closes on its own. And when it gets to the top floor, the door opens on its own again. You guys, I know I'm freaking out over these little features, but it's just so cool to have this in Minecraft. With the main mechanical issues out of the way, it was finally time to start having some fun and add detail to the area. In the end, this is what I ended up with for the lobby of the elevator. Back on the upper level, I began adding details to the towers. And then I had the great idea of actually splitting the bridge into two parts. So I began carving out a space. And when that was done, I hopped over to the creative world and began designing my grand vessel. Of all the structures we made in our steampunk world, this one was going to be the largest one yet. I transferred the blueprints over and did my best to place this massive monster between these two towers. With the cannon all set up, it was only a matter of time before the ship would finally be brought from dream to reality. Eventually, the first deck was complete, so I decided to do a little walk around to see how it was looking on the inside. I kept working on the towers, finishing the roof while the cannon kept building the airship. I ended up adding a lot more detail to the towers. Pipes, fences, iron bars, anything to make this place look beautiful. One of the last little add-ons I had to add was a safety measure as well as a beauty one. I needed to add lights, that way mobs wouldn't spawn, and I was just so happy with the way it turned out. And by this point, the ship was finally starting to look like a ship. I've said it before, and I will say it again. The schematic cannon is a godsend. I love being able to build one thing while a machine builds something else for me. Speaking of the schematic cannon, I was gonna have to craft another one because I was going to build a second tower. Well, not really. You see, I already had a second tower, but I just didn't feel like adding all of the details that I did to the first tower. Why not just have the cannon do it for me? After scanning the first tower with my blueprint, I began setting up the second cannon, but the first cannon had run out of materials. It needed red balloons. I was also going to have to craft regular balloons because the cannon was running out of those too. So I went to the one place where I knew I had lots of sugarcane to make paper, that being the cake factory. There was a ton of excess sugarcane that wasn't being processed yet, so I repurposed it for the paper needed to make the balloons. Once I had crafted enough of those blocks, it was simply a matter of going out into the wild and finding red flowers. Once I had collected more than enough flowers, I went back to the building area only to see what the back of the ship looked like. From down on the ground level, you could really get a sense of the scale. I crafted a lot of red balloons, and when I ran out of dye, I remembered that you could actually spam flowers with bone meal to duplicate them. I was also going to need a lot of wool, so I went to activate an old machine of ours to collect twine. With the twine, I was going to use it to make wool. I was going to have the twine mixed together in a basin to make string, but I forgot that I had a valve activated, so the basin filled with lava. Once I turned the valve off, everything worked fine. Now the reason I needed the wool was because the actual airship balloon itself wasn't going to be made out of the balloon blocks. It was going to be a mix of balloon blocks and wool blocks. I also needed more wood, but mining wood with an axe is just too slow. You recall in the last episode I talked about how we needed to upgrade our tools, so the axe was next. And what was I going to replace the axe with? A trusty chainsaw. Similar to the power drill, when making a chainsaw, it would only craft the base. We also had to make the saw, as well as the other components that would make it run beautifully. When everything was added to the base, all you had to do was fuel it up, and then it worked like a charm. Look at that. Cutting through the trees like a hot knife through butter. With all of these new blocks that we had, the schematic cannon could finally get back to doing its job. It continued to fire each block one by one. I wanted to see the progress, so I hopped into the prototype airship to get an aerial view. As you can see, the schematic cannon finally started constructing the balloon. It then occurred to me that that balloon was going to be one big monster spawning area. To avoid creepers blowing it up from the inside, I started placing a lot of torches. Finally, after all of our hard work, multiple redesigns, and a couple of hours watching YouTube, the ship was finally complete. As for the grand tour, well, there's not that much to this ship. We have some deck space on the top, and this little room, well, it has a spiral staircase. And the staircase, it goes up to the captain's quarters, which is, well, another empty room. I guess it does have something of a view, though you could get a better one on the boat deck, so yeah, it's just something to have here, but not really that useful. As for the lower levels, you could do a number of things with this space. Right now it's empty, but you could line it up with chests, you could put furnaces, anything you want. You could even decorate it if it's a passenger ship. In the back I have a water wheel, and that water wheel is powering the propellers on the outside, but I don't know if it's gonna work when we assemble the whole thing. And this is why. Sometimes some of the blocks are incompatible with the build, which causes the ship to tilt drastically. Now usually you have to break the block, or you can steer the ship and make it level again. That's what I'm gonna try to do. And I think I underestimated the space I needed. The area between the two bridges is way too narrow, so I hope that when I come back to park this thing, it's gonna be easy. But on the bright side, the ship moves. It's staying together. That's better than our first attempt at making a steam train. So I think things are going our way still. The airship was also way too heavy because it began to descend closer and closer to the ground. This meant we were going to need to add more balloons. I went back to the cake factory to craft more, and then I decided to hitch a ride on Old Faithful. After all, that was the only way to get back to the airship without having to stack dirt blocks. Yes, even old things can be repurposed and made anew. This teeny tiny little airship was now going to be a shuttle service. The only question lingering in the back of my mind was, where was I gonna park? It was gonna be a squeeze, but I knew I had room to land in there. And it was a successful landing. Once the airship was finally inside, I went to the captain's quarters, broke through the walls, and entered the main balloon. And there I applied all of the smaller balloons with the hope that this would be enough to lift it off the ground. Yes, the Create mod thrives off the concept of trial by error, and we were going to add as many balloons as we needed until this thing did what it had to do. It was time for the moment of truth. Could the balloon actually lift off the ground? And we had liftoff. This thing was beginning to rise up into the sky as God intended. Now, the ultimate test. Could I park this thing? I began my slow approach, when all of a sudden I realized that the ship was way too high. I forgot that if you took it too high, then you have to have an oxygen tank. I quickly got into the little airship and made my escape before I died. Parking this thing was gonna have to wait till morning. And even though I almost suffocated in the air, I couldn't help but admire how nice this ship looked, even at night. The next morning was the most difficult, annoying morning in this entire series. I was almost close to parking the ship, like I was 99% there. But to my surprise, and this is crazy because I did an entire search, there was an invisible block that was preventing the ship from pulling forward anymore. I don't know where the block is. I pulled the ship out, I searched the air, I searched the ground, all over the towers, there's nothing there. But the ship doesn't want to move forward, so I don't know. I like gold. I mean, what's not to like? It's shiny, it's worth a lot of money. And yes, I will admit that before the Nether update, it was kind of useless aside from making golden apples, but one thing has always remained the same. Gold has always been used to make a statement. This is just a simple fact, one that's been proven time and time again, dating all the way back to the good old days when one would build a simple house made out of golden blocks. They were ugly, but admit it, you all built one, and you chose to do that not because the material could be turned into some super armor like today. No, you simply chose gold because it was gold. It totally wasn't because of that one guy who called gold but... You know what? No. Some things need to stay in the past. If it wasn't clear enough by the title or my 1-minute rant, then yes, today we are making a gold factory. Gold farm? Call it whatever you want, we're making gold out of thin air. Let's go. Now where does one put such a building? How about in that pristine, natural habitat of a jungle that's conveniently located right across the river? Now I will acknowledge that we have a perfectly flat plain right in front of the cake factory, but that is waterfront property. I can't lower its property value by obscuring the view, so instead, I'm gonna cross the river, tear down a bunch of trees, evict a bunch of animals, and build my gold factory. But before I do that, we need a way to get across, so it's time to build a bridge. I decided to keep this one simple, nothing too fancy, just a nice little path of slabs across the water. With the help of my chainsaw, clearing out the trees was a breeze. The terrain was a little uneven, so I had to terraform a little by filling in the holes with dirt. For the more heavy-duty terraforming, I relied on my trusty power drill. You know, it may not look like it, but these simple tools make these menial tasks so fun. With the boring terraforming out of the way, I decided to add a few more details to my bridge. I didn't want to go too overboard with the bridge design, so I decided to keep it simple. Stone arches, light posts to illuminate it. This was the ideal bridge. And now, for the last of the prep work, building the foundation. I love getting the most out of my materials, so I cut up a bunch of stone and cobblestone into slabs and placed them down. With the foundation laid, all I had to do was reinforce the walls that faced the river. I wanted them to match the design I had on the other side, a mix of cobblestone and cobblestone bricks. Hopefully, if we keep building along the river, we will have a proper canal. But that is far into the future. Right now, I just had to finish this wall because there were more pressing matters to attend to, more golden opportunities. I put down the traditional trapdoors to act as guardrails, and like that, the wall was done. Now, time for the fun part. What does a gold factory even look like? More importantly, how does a gold factory even work? Well, I do know one thing. It requires crushing wheels. Lots and lots of crushing wheels. I'm not kidding. This is probably the one machine in this world that has the most crushing wheels. Why? Well, we'll get into that later. But until then, let's move on. Now these wheels, they're gonna need power, and this simple steam engine's not gonna cut it. See, up until now, we've been powering steam engines with water and campfires to generate heat. But the heat isn't intense enough to generate the force we need to rotate all those wheels. So, we're gonna have to turn to an alternative source for power. We're gonna turn to lava. Thankfully, we do have a source of lava generation. It's just across the river. So, we're gonna have to build a pipeline. I went to the workshop to turn some copper into pipes. When the pipes were crafted, I used some of them to make pumps, and then after that, I made my way to the lava room to see how I was gonna make this work. Well, for starters, I was gonna have to create a big hole in the wall. It wasn't gonna look nice, but sacrifices have to be made in the name of progress. After that, I began placing the pipes, doing my best to conceal them in the hillside. This was gonna be an underwater pipeline. If it was above the water, well, that just looks bad and it was gonna block the way for any future boating projects we may have. Now that I had gotten the pipe on the other side, it was time to clear some space for the engine. Now, my main goal for this engine was to make it automatic. Up until now, we were powering steam engines with campfires and water wheels. But, like I said before, the campfires don't produce enough heat for the power that we need, but lava does, only if you put it in a blaze burner. So we're gonna have a lava bucket going in and out of a deployer, which should place the lava into the blaze burner for us, making an infinite loop of power. But first we have to get the lava here. So I activated the pumps and the lava started flowing from the farm to the gold factory. With the lava powering the engines, it was finally time to build the machine that would generate all of our gold. We've built a lot of things in this world, but this one is probably going to be the one with the most steps, because to make gold, well, think of it this way, we are turning cobblestone into gold nuggets. There's just a lot of stuff in between so that we can get there. Around the halfway point when I was constructing this thing, I was beginning to start regretting that I didn't design it in the creative world first, because there was a lot of trial and error with this machine, but in the end, it was 100% worth it. All we had to do now was to build a beautiful exterior shell to cover up all these components. Now I'll ask again, what exactly does a gold factory look like? Well, I'll tell you one thing. This design was going to be far more ornate than anything we've built yet. You see, it was a factory, but I didn't want it to look like a factory. Truth be told, I wanted this area, this side of the river, to represent wealth, power, opulence, the finer concepts associated with gold. So instead of making it look like a factory, I was gonna make it look like it was part of a palace. I started off with the usual granite and brick foundations, and eventually I incorporated that trusty acacia wood that we love using in these builds. I also incorporated these more ornate windows, which kind of resemble those in the original 100 Days world. Consider the construction of this building a return to finer times. And of course, every great building has a tower. Well, not every great building, but most of them. There it is, friends. In all of its glory, the Gold Factory. When you compare it to other buildings like the Cake Factory, well, there is no comparison. I even threw in some gold blocks just to emphasize that this place is where the money is made. And as for the inside, well, you know what? Let me give you a tour and show you how the machine works. Alright, so all those crushing wheels, well, that's what they're for. To crush cobblestone and turn it into gravel. Cobblestone that comes from our fabulous cobblestone generator. Thanks to the power of the steam engine, the factory was producing lots of cobblestone, all of which was grounded up into gravel and then once again grounded up into sand. But when you crush gravel, you do get more than just sand. You also have a chance of generating flint as well as clay. But the fact is, we only need the sand. Which leads to the question, how do we sort the rest of the items? The sand is filtered away from the rest of the items. What remains are the flint and the clay, which continue to proceed down the belt. The flint and the clay continue to move along the line until they get to a series of sorting funnels, which separates the two. And once they're sorted, the clay goes into a chest, while the flint is disposed of in a little lava pool down below. You see, we have way too much flint, and I have no use for it, at least for now. As for the sand, like I said before, it's able to phase right through the belt down to the lower levels. This is accomplished thanks to chutes which are right underneath the belt. The next step involves washing the sand with water. With the help of an encased fan, there is a small chance that the sand will drop clay, which is exactly what we need. The sand comes out in stacks of 64 onto the depot where it's met by the blast of water coming from the mechanical fan. Once it's washed, it will leave clay, which is then put down on the lower assembly line where it awaits the next step, that being pressed into a block by a mechanical press. Now there is a reason why we need to press the clay into a block. You see, it's only in block form that you can turn the clay into hardened clay. And to accomplish that, we're gonna have to have the clay block go over the belt where they're gonna sit over an encased fan. The fan is gonna blow hot air from the lava that's right above it, and it's gonna bake the clay into hardened clay. Once the clay is baked, it's going to proceed down the line into another series of chutes where there is an encased fan that will elevate the blocks up to a higher level. Up on the second level, the hardened clay is ready for the next step. It needs to be crushed into red sand. The clay comes out of the chutes, goes down the conveyor belt, and it enters into a pair of crushing wheels. The crushing wheels ground up the blocks into red sand, which is exactly what we need because to get the gold, we have to wash the red sand with water. When the sand is washed with water, there is a 12% chance that it will drop 3 gold nuggets. Once a gold nugget is produced, it goes into a chest where the tally on the board is once again raised to reflect the number in the chest. And there you have it! That is how we make gold out of thin air. It is a pretty complicated machine, and no doubt it has a lot of steps. But the end result is definitely worth it. And the Blaze Burner engine? It is a marvel. And there it is across the river, just sitting there gloriously. Now, I do have a problem, that being that there needs to be another one right next to it. I mean, I just love symmetry. I scanned the building, grabbed a schematic cannon, and started constructing the next one. Now, this one didn't have to produce gold, but like I said before, it just looked kind of weird having one on the right and not one on the left. It took some time, but eventually the twin buildings were finally together. It was now time to admire my work. These were definitely some of the more detailed buildings in this world, and I decided that this side of the river was going to be more, like I said, opulent, more grand. What's another word? Palatial? I don't know, but this was going to be the fancy side of town, while the other side was going to be left for the more, industrial, factory-type buildings. Here we were going to produce fine goods. Speaking of producing fine goods, it was finally time to have a little fun with some of the gold we had already made. Now the really cool thing about this mod pack is that you can do a lot of cool stuff with gold, like making this massive gold boiler. It just looks like a giant coin. The question is, what can we do with such a unique looking block? Well, I may have a couple of ideas. I began crafting different blocks, trying to figure out how I wanted to use this item. But time and time again, there was one idea that just kept flying around my brain. A throne. A golden throne. Like I said before, gold has always been used to make a statement, and what better statement to make than by sitting on a golden throne showing off your wealth. But we're not going to stop there. What about gold accessories? I'm talking about golden armor, only in this mod pack, the helmet looks like a crown. Yes, with this golden crown and this golden throne, I definitely think I'm getting the message across. And there are also some other small golden accessories like these golden gloves. And of course, how can you possibly forget about the golden necklace? And here I am with a golden setup that even Midas would envy. Golden throne, golden armor, golden sword? It doesn't get any better than this. Unless you like diamond, but Everything was going so well until I noticed one small thing. And this was not so small, actually. I think I'm downplaying how much of a problem this was. You see, we have the pair of buildings here, and well, something looked a little off, so I had to be sure. I started counting the spaces between the buildings with blocks. Okay, that one is fine. What is that, like 5 of them? Okay, and I'm going to have to count the other one. I wonder what that one is going to be. It better be even worst case scenario. It's slightly off by a block. And this one was off by 2 blocks. Not 1, 2 blocks. The entire setup was ruined. The buildings were not evenly spaced apart. It's something I'm gonna have to correct later, but yeah, that is definitely like a rock in my shoe. But aside from that, at least they did their job. Today I'm going to work on a little vanity project, in the sense that this build is going to accomplish absolutely nothing for this world. I'm just going to build it because it's cool to have. Now the first step to building a giant vault is of course drilling into the mountain, and we can't drill unless we fuel the power drill. With the drill powered up, I went back to the mountain and began breaking up a bunch of blocks, but there was a little problem. You see, this was a very big mountain, and sometimes I would have to reach really high up to break the blocks, and sometimes I couldn't reach that far. But there is a special tool that can extend your reach. This tool is called an extendo grip. Kind of a funny name, but it does exactly that. It extends your reach. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have to craft one of these. I got some brass, smashed it down so that we could have the plates, and began collecting other materials. Once I had everything I needed, I placed the items into the mechanical crafter, as that was the only way you could make one of these things. I really do need to speed up the mechanical crafter because this is actually a slightly sped up version. Anyways, with the extendo grip now crafted, it was finally time to get to work. Of course, I did have to test it first. I mean, you can't just create something new and not give it a try. All you have to do is put the tool in your offhand, and then you scroll through the hotbar like usual, and it will hold on to any item you have. Naturally, I tested the pickaxe as it was the blocks that I wanted to reach far to break. And yeah, this thing definitely extended your reach. And bonus tip, if you don't want to lose any durability, make sure you have an air tank. And yes, of course, it worked with the wonderful power drill. Now we were breaking a ton of blocks and we could break them up and down, left to right. It didn't matter how far they were or what direction they were in, the extendo grip could reach all. Although, like I said before, the air tank will prevent the durability from going down, but you have to make sure that it's full of air. The next step was to make a giant round frame where the giant vault door was gonna go. Now, I didn't know how I wanted this to work. All I knew was that I wanted it to be a spiral door. You know, I think they're called iris doors. It's where the triangular blades open up. Now, this was gonna be a little tricky, and in the creative world, I went through many trials and errors, but I finally got it down. Once I had perfected the spiral design as well as the mechanics to get the door to open, all I had to do was save the schematic and transfer it over to the survival world. I took the preview of the door and tried to align it exactly with my granite frame that I had made earlier. With the preview perfectly aligned, all I had to do was set up the schematic cannon, and from there, it took care of the rest. With the frame done, I manually built the door on the inside. You can see the spiral there, and yeah, now I just had to get it to open. Now to do this, I was gonna need a special type of remote. Now I don't remember exactly what this was called, but it basically acts as a remote that sends a signal to other redstone components. The goal is to send a signal to the doors to have it open on its own, but I do have to link it with other redstone components. I had windmills for power, I had gear shifts to dictate how the doors were gonna open, and of course I had mechanical bearings to ensure that they could move at all. All I had to do was link each blade to the redstone control. And seeing as how they were really spread apart, it was a little dangerous, especially if I wasn't watching where I was going, because sometimes, I fall. There was a couple of, let's call them mishaps. You know, like I said before, it's usually good to test something before you use it for real. I went back, fixed the door, and well, take a look for yourself. I thought that the elevator was really cool, but this thing, it blows the elevator out of the water. The vault door, the round door, the iris door, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. It worked. All of the blades opened perfectly in sync, and they closed in sync as well. All of that happening with the simple push of a button from my trusty redstone controller. With the vault door complete, now I had to design the vault itself. This was going to involve way more digging. Thankfully, the power drill would come in handy. Now the door did stick out a little, so I had to build a roof connecting the mountain with the vault door. Once the roof was finally complete, the next step was to actually detail the interior of what was just a simple, massive cave. I wanted to go for something grand because this was going to be the place where we were going to store all of our riches. I had a couple of things in mind, but there was one thing I knew I had to have. Massive columns on both the left and right side, as well as a beautiful, ornate floor. Now, the big question, which project was I going to tackle first? Well, seeing as how the floor is right there, that seemed the most easy. I dug up the floor and began placing slabs, trying to figure out what kind of pattern I wanted to do. In the end, I settled for a simple checkered pattern made up of andesite slabs as well as stone slabs. You can always rely on a checkered pattern. It's simple, but it looks nice. Next, I wanted to add some illumination. I began constructing these fire bowls on the sides of the path. I know we're in a steampunk world, but for the vault, I was going for a more ancient look. You know, the kind of atmosphere you'd find in an Indiana Jones movie where he's walking through a lost temple. Old, but monumentally grand. Though I was faithful to the color palette of this world, and I used a lot of acacia logs. Okay, so I finished the main chamber, but now I wanted the actual loot chamber. See, this was just a lobby. The real vault was going to be behind another set of massive doors. With the new room finally created, it was finally time to take in everything that I had constructed. A little self-evaluation. And yeah, everything was looking good. Now it was time to get back to the more technical side of things, making these massive doors work. These were not going to be spiral doors like the main one. They were just going to be regular doors, but they were going to be massive. I went to the Andesite alloy factory to gather some materials for the next essential block, that block being a radial chassis. You see, this block was going to make it possible for the door to open and close. Once they were crafted, I went back to the vault and began installing the chassis. Next, I added glue to the sides because I was going to be building some pretty large doors and I wanted to move with the chassis when they rotated. Now, before I began building the doors, I did want to craft some red sand because I was going to make red sandstone. The reason I'm making red sandstone was because I was going to use them for light fixtures. There were some lights I wanted to put on the walls of the vault. Now, these lights weren't going to be anything special, but it was very dark inside of the vault, and well, it would be nice to have lights to prevent mobs from spawning. I wouldn't want to store my gold in a place where I know it'd be in danger of getting blown up by creepers. I duplicated the design 7 more times, and well, in my opinion, I think that's plenty of lights. It was finally time to build the doors, and surprise, surprise, I am using acacia logs again. And just like the Iris store, I was once again going to be using the redstone links, windmill blocks, mechanical bearing, and the sequence gear shift. Took me a while to remember what it was called. Once everything was glued together, it was finally time for a test run, and like I said before, I don't want creepers blowing it up, but how about if I had 2 giant guardian creepers protecting my loot? Okay, so the vault is finally complete. We have 2 sets of giant doors that can adequately protect all of our loot. The only thing that's missing now is the loot. So it's time to make a trip to our gold factory where we're going to convert all of our gold nuggets into gold ingots. And we're going to turn those gold ingots into gold blocks. Now, what are we going to do with those gold blocks? Well, you'll see. The next few things are going to seem a little wasteful, but like I said before, this is a vanity project. So let's have some fun with it. First off, we're going to use these gold blocks to fill up this room. And I'm talking a giant mound of gold, maybe 2. Of course, this gold doesn't look nice unless it has light bouncing off of it, so of course I have to add fire as well. But gold blocks, that isn't enough. While brainstorming what to add, I came across our old throne and the giant gold boiler behind it. The block looked cool, so why not have more? That's right. I'm going to be converting some of these gold blocks into these massive boilers. Now, the boilers are actually used for trains, but they look like giant gold coins. On top of that, I had to craft some clay blocks and bake them because I was going to be making pottery. Now, why was I going to need pottery? Well, it turns out that if you combine the different pots, and they do come in all shapes and sizes, if you combine them with gold blocks, then they become gold pottery. Just the thing we need. I went back and added the pots as well as the boilers, trying to figure out which was the best possible way to place them. And you may also notice that I've added some little hints of emerald block in there. I didn't add much because, well, I didn't have that many emeralds to begin with, but I like the way they popped out. And of course, last but not least, since this is a treasury room, it at least deserves a nice floor. And once again, I am reverting to the good old checkered pattern. The room was almost done, but the walls were a little lacking, so I added some small details just so that there was a little depth. That way they didn't look so plain. There it is, the finished product. The treasury was done, the vault doors were done, the creepers were guarding all of our loot. It all came together perfectly. I don't know about you guys, but this was a fun little project to take on, and these doors, they were impenetrable. Nothing could get... What is that? Who is that? Somehow, it looked like someone got past my security. I opened the doors, and they are really slow at opening, but it looks so cool, so I can overlook it. And thankfully, there was nobody in there. I'm guessing that the guy was above the ground or beneath our feet. Okay, I've put this off for long enough. As you may recall, for the last couple of episodes, we've been building this luxury district, a place where we can make gold and other fine goods. We started with a gold factory, which was an absolute marvel. We're just making gold out of thin air. I also created the vaults at the end of the road of this luxury district, and inside of the vault, a place for us to store our wealth. Yes, this place is really coming together. There's only one problem. You see, one of the buildings is off by 2 blocks. And that's a huge problem because it makes this path uneven, and I am a sucker for symmetry.
So, it's time to address this problem, and many of you have been suggesting that I can simply push the building with a piston. So, we're gonna give that a try. But before we get started, special thanks to SolarBeast1415 for today's video idea. Let's go. Now, pushing a building with a piston sounds easy, but there is some prep work I have to get out of the way. For example, I have to mine out all of these blocks so that the building has room to shift when the piston pushes it forward. After that, it was time for the grueling task of gluing everything together. I made a nice little cobblestone column so that I could start at one corner and end up gluing at the other corner. But unfortunately, there was one thing I didn't know about glue. It can only cover so many blocks because there is a maximum limit. Seeing as to how the selected area was way too big, I was gonna have to glue the building in sections if I wanted to cover the whole thing. Now, the next mistake I made was thinking that a regular piston could get the job done, but that wasn't the case. I was gonna need a mechanical piston, a special block exclusive to the Create mod. Now, the mechanical piston did require some prep work, so I set up a water wheel, got some water from the river, and got this thing up and running. The only problem was that, well, there was a block in the way. I don't know if this was a block I forgot to glue, but I had to break it if I wanted this to work. So I went through the maze of machines to find the one block, and I don't know if this was the exact one, but I broke it and it should have worked, except there was another problem. The piston could only push a maximum of 2,048 blocks. I had glued too many blocks together. So, at the time, the only solution I could think of was actually going underneath the building and breaking all of the stone that I had glued. I was hoping that I would break enough blocks to get under the 2,048 limit. Many blocks later, I had carved a nice empty space underneath the factory. And look at that, the building moved! It wasn't perfect, and some parts of the building weren't moving with the whole structure, but I was able to figure out the rest of the details. And now that the building was moved, all I had to do was fill in the gaps where the building once stood, making the path perfectly symmetrical. All according to plan, of course. And there it is! The luxury district was finally as it should be. Now, it was finally time for the fun part, the moment you've all been waiting for. It was time to make our golden apples, and with the help of the second gold factory and all of its gold nuggets, that was going to be possible. But before we could get started, there were some tasks I had to get out of the way, like making a basin. The reason I needed a basin, as well as a mechanical press, was because I wanted to automate the conversion of gold nuggets into gold ingots, and this is how I was gonna do it. There was a chest right there where I was storing my nuggets, and yes, I could put the nuggets in a crafting table and make the ingots manually, but that takes too long, so instead I attached them with funnels next to the conveyor belt with that basin there, and the idea was that the nuggets would come out of the chest, go into the basin, and be pressed together into ingots with the press. And there you see the nuggets that are coming out, and the press is activated, and once there's 9, it goes down, and boom! We have our automated gold ingot system. The next task involved getting apples, and where do you get apples? Well, from the mighty oak tree, of course. We needed a place to mass produce these oak trees, so I began carving another hole into the mountainside, and at this point I was starting to regret building by a mountain because it involves a lot of terraforming when you want to build, but anyways, the idea was that I needed a flat plane to build the foundation of this next building, this oak tree farm. Now, we had wood farms in the past, but this was the first time where we were actually harvesting trees, not for the wood, but instead for the apples. So we were going to need a tall building, and it was going to be based off of a greenhouse. At least that was what I was thinking. I built this auto harvester. You guys have seen this design multiple times now. It's very useful. I attached the deployers because the deployers are the ones that replant the saplings. See, there I'm setting the filter with the acorns. And after that, I had to attach the saws to the lower level so that they could chop the trees down. Okay, the harvester is finally complete. Now, the only thing left to do is bring it all together with the cart assembler, and the cart assembler is kind of tricky to use. Sometimes it glitches. Speaking of glitches, my game started breaking on me. I was breaking blocks and they weren't appearing. I wasn't able to pick them up, so I had to leave, disconnect, join back, and give it another try. There was my cart assembler, and now it was the moment of truth. Was this going to work? Well, I hope it would because I built these multiple times, and would you know it, look at that. It glitched. It assembled on the other side for some reason. I don't even know how that happened. And the worst part was that when the machine started coming back towards me, well, take a look at this. It started breaking my building. Good thing I didn't finish building those columns. Anyways, I had to fix that, and once they were finally in the right position, they were running back and forth as they should have. Now, it was time to move on to the next step, planting the trees. I began putting acorns in each deployer's hand. To be honest, I didn't have that many acorns, but we could start with a few. After that, I made a little belt system with chests and funnels where I would sort all the items that came from the oak trees: wood, acorn, apple, sticks. Now it was simply a matter of planting the trees and letting the machine harvest everything. I had to give it a push, and off it went, beautifully running as it should. Once again, we relied on our trusty acacia block to make up the foundation of the build. I used sandstone for the roof, and the main reason I use sandstone is because I think it just looks so clean compared to the other blocks. It's just got a nice smooth texture. Anyways, I started adding details to the lower level, and I was thinking about filling this area with water, but I'm not sure on that yet. Let me know in the comments what you think I should fill in this area down here. I was also thinking about adding lava or fire, but then it just occurred to me that the upper part of this building is made out of wood, and as we know, wood and fire don't mix. Anyways, I was finally working on the roof, adding these columns with these pipes and the sandstone walls, and of course, we have to use our classic warped log roof design. I think this is just a pretty cool color palette. I don't know why, but I've stuck with it, and I'm gonna continue sticking with it. But you know what, like I said before, I am open to suggestion. Leave a comment down below if you think I should do something else. But the interior was finally done, and this is what it looks like. The machine was running, and the windows and the roof, it just all came together real nice. Look at the sun shining through the windows there. It was doing a good job. A little too good. The machine was harvesting at full force, and there was a point where all the logs were overfilling the chest. So I had to make a disposal system with lava. This is what the outside looks like. I don't know what I based it off of, but I think it looks pretty. And there was also an alley in between the gold factory and the apple factory, so I was gonna have to link the two somehow between this tiny gap. Anyways, the sorting system was working like a charm. Apples were going into the filter, and they were being collected there for future use. Now the next problem I had to tackle was how was I gonna combine the gold with the apples? Well, one problem at a time. First, we were gonna have to address something at our gold factory, that being this. You see, the gold had to be transported, so it was time to make an assembly line that would take the gold from point A to point B. I dug underneath the factory, and the next step was to build a platform. See that huge gap there that we dug earlier? There was plenty of space for this platform, also plenty of space for the belt. Using wood slabs, I quickly threw something together. This wasn't going to be fancy because it was underground, and if it's out of sight and out of mind, then I don't worry about putting too many details as long as it gets the job done. Anyways, I began tunneling under the apple farm, apple factory, whatever you want to call it. The apples were being made there. Once I was inside, I went back underground and began making a larger path. That way there was more room to walk and I could build easier. Next, I began building the contraption that would combine the gold and the apples together. A basin and a mixer and 2 funnels on each side for each item to enter through. The belts were going to be complicated, but it didn't matter because the job was going to be completed. So I set that up, and it was looking pretty good. I even had a chest there that was going to be connected to some chutes where the apples would be blown in from the bottom. So that was the idea. I put the cog and got the mixer started, and after that, well, it was simply time to attach the chest, and the system was, I'd say, about 95% complete. But the big question was it going to run? So I gathered some gold, and I also grabbed some apples because I wanted to see if this was going to work, and good thing I gave it a try before turning everything on because look at that, it didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work until I looked at the crafting recipe, and to my surprise, mixers were not able to combine gold and apples. It had to be a mechanical crafter. So everything I just did right now, absolutely useless. I demolished the whole thing and I had to go back to the drawing board, this time with a design that was going to incorporate a mechanical crafter. And yes, I had to take my time, I had to think it over, but I was able to get it done. So I went back, and this is what I ended up with. A nice, simple, clean interface with an apple in the middle. You're probably wondering how it works. Well, let me show you. Okay, here we are back at the gold factory. The gold is being compounded into ingots. I set the gold filter so that only ingots come out, and all I have to do is let the gold out. The gold goes onto the conveyor belt where it travels to the apple farm. After that, the mechanical fan blows the gold upwards. Meanwhile, the apples are being stored in a hopper. The hopper transports them into the mechanical crafter, where the apple is then met with the gold, where they are then combined into golden apples. Well, there you have it, friends, the Golden Apple Factory. I'm going to be taking future suggestions from the comments section, so be sure to comment what you want me to build next so I don't run out of ideas. Today is a great day, because today we're going to be making chocolate. And all you need is sugar, cocoa, and milk. It's that simple. A special thanks to Sanic from Roblox for today's video idea. If you want your idea featured next, be sure to leave a like and comment down below. Enough engagement farming, let's make some chocolate. Now I am going to make a factory, but first I need to find a place to make some free samples. And this old house that we've made is the perfect spot to do that. It's old and it's forgotten, we haven't used it, so why not repurpose it for something good, something better? Sentiment is the enemy of progress, so we're gonna burn everything old and replace it with something new. Also, there's this thing. I don't know what this is, but it was in one of the chests and it started talking to me, so yeah, I'm gonna hold on to this evil demonic looking eye for a while. Nothing bad ever came from cursed artifacts. Back at the old house, I began by breaking up this old wood floor. Wood planks, we're done with that because we're using diorite, as well as deep slate, and with those two blocks, we're going to be making a beautiful checkered floor that resembles a kitchen. We're also breaking up the old roof in favor of higher ceilings because it just makes the space feel way more open. Alright, so the next step now is to make some cabinets, birch cabinets, because this is going to be a kitchen for preparing the sweetest delicacies. And of course, what's a kitchen without a stove? A brick stove. So we're going to add that there, and we'll add a little overhead for the stove as well. And next, we have to add a power source for our mixer, where we're going to mix up all of our ingredients to make a delicious chocolate sample. As for everything I have so far, well, at the time I thought it was all coming together nicely. I even used a pressure plate to look like a cutting board when all of a sudden I remembered there were actually cutting boards in the mod pack. I then went to the workshop to convert these planks into boards. I ran the wood through the buzzsaw multiple times and it took a long time to actually get the one item that I needed. All it would do was change the texture of the block. This was a very annoying process, but eventually I got the materials I needed and made some furniture. After that, I began looking for ways to decorate this kitchen, anything at all, and then I discovered you could make granite countertops, so I replaced the old wood ones and swapped them for something better, the granite ones. Look how clean that looks. I then turned my attention to the ceiling where I felt that we could use more light, so I broke through it and made some skylights. And I am so happy that I did that because these skylights made a world of a difference, just lots of natural light pouring in. The next step was to add these nice hanging flower pots. I wanted a little color in this kitchen because it was still a little dull, just nothing but grays and whites. So these flowers, they added that nice extra pop that I was looking for. Flowers of all colors, orange, blue, red, pink. They definitely gave this place more life. And of course, what's a kitchen without a cooking pot? After all that, it was finally time to make the chocolate. Remember the key 3 ingredients? We were gonna need milk, cocoa beans, and lots of sugar. After that, we had to provide heat to the blaze burner, and then the mixer would automatically combine all the ingredients together, leaving you nothing but delicious chocolate. Now, it was time to press the chocolate into bars, and to do this, we were going to use the mechanical press. It just smashes it all together, and what you're left with are these beautiful bars of chocolate. Delicious, sweet, and absolutely addicting. This kitchen was the perfect place to eat our free samples. We're definitely going to come back here to cook some more treats, but as for now, we're going to move on because this kitchen simply can't produce the quantity of chocolate I need to satisfy my craving. I needed more chocolate, which meant I needed even more cocoa beans. Thankfully, there was a jungle directly across the river behind our fancy district. The only problem is that they only grow in the summer. So we had to find a solution to work around the seasons. And yes, we had a solution. Introducing the garden cloche. It's basically a mini greenhouse, and we can grow anything we want when we want, regardless of the season. To get this thing working, I had to provide it with power, which meant I had to add more dangerous electrical wires to our workshop courtyard. The next thing I needed to do was to set up a fluid pump. For the garden cloche to work, you had to provide water so that the plant could actually grow. I provided power to the pump as well. It was simply a matter of connecting the pump. Oh, and yeah, don't do what I just did. You are guaranteed to die if you touch those wires. There is power flowing through them and they will kill you. Anyways, like I was
Anyways, like I was saying, don't touch the wires, otherwise you're gonna end up like this. Yeah, not a pretty sight. I went back to collect my materials, being extra careful around the live wires, and then I provided power to the pump. Water was now flowing into the garden cloche, which meant we could grow things. And guess what? The cocoa beans were not compatible with the machine. I couldn't grow anything in it. So it was time to move on to plan B. We were simply gonna have to grow them the old-fashioned way with jungle logs. I chopped down a tree, and trying to stay optimistic, I went back to the workshop to give the garden cloche another try. I was trying to grow cocoa beans on dirt and maybe wood would work, and it didn't. Yeah, all of this was absolutely useless, at least for our purposes, but I was able to grow some nice healthy carrots. But I don't want carrots, I need chocolate! So I went back to collect more jungle logs because that was going to be the only way to do this. Next, I began laying the foundation for what would be our beautiful chocolate factory. I put it right next to the cake factory and figured, hey, this is going to be our sweets district where we're going to make chocolate, cake, pies, and basically anything your dentist would advise against eating. I finished the foundation of the chocolate factory. Now it was time to move on to the more technical side, growing the cocoa beans. And for that, I was going to build this large greenhouse. Now, the greenhouse wasn't going to serve any function. It was just cosmetic. But I couldn't pass up a chance to work with glass. We never work with glass in this world. I don't know why. We should. But anyways, once I was done building the walls, I began placing the dirt to grow the cocoa beans. And this is honestly where I had a brain fart moment, because you don't need dirt to grow cocoa beans. You only need the jungle logs. I've been playing this game for I don't know how many years, and I still forget sometimes. Anyways, with the logs set up, I began attaching the cocoa beans, and I didn't have enough to get every single log covered. So I was going to have to wait for some of them to mature before I could start growing more. And then it occurred to me, how was I going to get the cocoa beans onto a conveyor belt? So I decided to pour some water, and the idea was that when the cocoa bean was harvested, it would flow down the water. Some of the cocoa beans had already grown, so I harvested them and planted them on the other logs. I mined up all the dirt and began pouring water in its place. I needed a nice strong current that was going to carry all the cocoa beans to the conveyor belt. Once all of the water was poured, I began carving a channel at the very end, and that was where the conveyor belt was going to go. I placed the belt down and then began working on tanks where we were going to start storing some of the ingredients for the chocolate. Now these tanks were going to be used to store milk. The question is, where were we going to get the milk from? Well, luckily for us, there is a source of milk real close. I built a pipeline all the way to the cake factory. We had a large supply just sitting there because the cake factory was temporarily out of order. So why not put it to use? Which is exactly what I did. I connected the pipe to the cake factory, and shortly after I added power to the pumps. The milk began flowing from point A to point B, and eventually it reached the chocolate factory where it was being stored in these tanks for future use. Not just one tank, but two. After that, it was time to move on to the next phase, but before I could do that, there were these gross flies that just spawned out of nowhere after I had killed a zombie. The chocolate factory was under attack by these biohazards, but once they were taken care of, I began raising the walls and adding the deployers that would harvest the cocoa beans. And trust me when I say, it was a lot of deployers. I was a little worried that they weren't going to run, but that was a worry for later. Right now, I just had to make sure that they were all going to be connected. And once they were connected, it was simply a matter of putting a belt together that would fuse all of these machines as one. Now, the question is, was it going to work or would it get overstressed? And it worked! They all descended down on the cocoa beans, and with a single poke, they were all harvested. The cocoa beans flowed down the water and onto the conveyor belts, though some of them did land on the floor, so I had to add a glass barrier so that they would simply flow onto the conveyor belt. I began brainstorming on how I wanted the rest of the factory to look, but there was the issue of powering everything, so I began digging a tunnel with the drill, and this tunnel led all the way to the river, because that's where the pipeline was for the lava. We were going to transfer lava from our lava center all the way to the cake factory. The pipeline ran underneath everything else, and once it got to the cake factory, it was then deposited onto an assembly line with a bucket that would catch it. And like our other engine designs, the bucket would rotate around, go into a funnel that would then transfer into the hands of a deployer, which would deposit lava into the blaze burner. Once the blaze burner was hot, everything began running, which meant we could start transferring items like sugarcane. I built a little farm there, and next to the farm was the conveyor belt line that was going to transfer all the sugarcane and convert it into sugar. Everything was finally taking shape, and it was only a matter of time before all the ingredients were going to come together. And things were looking good, but there was a problem. You see, everything was already in the basin and it should have started mixing, but it wasn't. Why? Because there needed to be a blaze burner underneath the basin. So I had to make another lava setup that would constantly supply the burner with lava. And once it was heated up, it was finally ready to start making chocolate, but the spout was showing through the floor and it looked ugly. So I had to come up with a quick solution, which ended up being just a simple cover-up. But yeah, the factory was now making chocolate, which was conveniently being pumped into the tank right next to the basin. The only downside of this new design was that there was a big pipe that was just ruining the look of this factory. So I had to hide the rest of the pipe behind a wall, which I made, but it gets the job done. Okay, well, at this point, everything was running exactly as it should. So it was simply a matter of constructing the rest of the building, and that would make the factory 100% complete. I was getting a little tired of building with acacia logs. I mean, yes, acacia looks pretty, but I wanted this factory to stand out. And it did. Instead of using acacia, I used way more sandstone, lots of diorite, glass, and deep slate. And before I covered it up, I did want to show you that there is a pipeline that runs underneath the floor which transports chocolate from the tank into that basin over there. Anyways, I also added cake displays and chocolate pie displays because it's a chocolate factory. We're gonna have chocolate treats on display, obviously. Well, here it is, the culmination of all of our work. We finally had a fully functioning, self-reliant chocolate factory. This chocolate factory was producing more chocolate than a person could eat in an entire lifetime. We had cocoa beans that were growing, they were being converted into chocolate. Everything was going exactly as it should have. And I am so happy that I got to build this because this was one of the most fun builds I've had in this entire Steampunk series. So once again, thank you so much for recommending it. I look forward to hearing more from you guys. I can't wait to see what you want me to build next. This has been a very fun session of Steampunk Minecraft, and just look at it go. All of the ingredients were being mixed up and stored in a tank. After that, the tank would transfer all of the contents via pipeline underneath the factory to this basin here. And the purpose of the basin? To smash all of the chocolate into these wonderful chocolate bars. If you hate candy, then honestly, I feel bad for you. Maybe in the next video, I'll build you a salad factory. In the steampunk world, transportation is key. Hence the reason we put so much emphasis on all of these vehicles like this little blimp, or the colossal airship that we built I don't know how many episodes back. Anyways, the point is that we need to get to places, and it's only with our creative engineering that we can make that happen. So today, we're gonna make something new, but not without scouting a proper site to build this new machine. As you can see, I effortlessly executed a perfect landing. Now it was simply a matter of getting to the main helm and steering the ship to our new build site, although things were a little off about the airship. Like, really off actually. Lanterns were floating, blocks were like corrupted or something? I don't know why it was like that, but it didn't matter. This thing still moved, and that's all we needed. I began soaring towards this new build site, and although it was at a slow speed, it was still better than traversing through all those jungle trees. Anyways, by the next day we got there and we took our little landing craft to descend down to the surface. And once I approached the land, you can see here that I have already started working on some new stuff. Yeah, I've been here before. And there it is, the site of our new project. I had already set up the materials prior to this video, so you won't have to worry about the boring aspects of this. One of the first tasks we had to tackle was clearing out all of the stone and all of this dirt. To get the job done, we were going to use the old nether drill that we had built a few episodes prior. Yes, this drill was an engineering marvel. It could break through multiple blocks, and it was powered by a single piece of coal. If we wanted to, this thing could just keep running indefinitely, but today, we just needed to clear out a few blocks. This thing is such a big time saver. Imagine having to break up all these blocks one by one. Anyways, it only took a day and all of this stuff was gone. We had a nice flat plane to build on. There was only one more task I wanted to tackle. That being breaking up the ground one more layer, that way we could lay down some nice stone brick slabs, just to have a nice pavement. Anyways, we were gonna have to smelt all of that cobblestone to get our stone slabs, and to do this I made a fan setup. You know, the setup where you put the lava in front of the fan, and then the fan, it blows all of that hot air out so that you can have an instant furnace. Anyways, this is the setup if you want to save a lot of coal. And that's what I did. I threw the cobblestone in, it was converted to stone, and the stone was then turned into the slabs. There we go. That looks way better. Now we can finally start working on our new project, the boat. And what's the best way to start building a boat? By making train tracks. Now, I may have just lost you there, but let me explain. You see, we did have the Valkyrian Skies mod, but I wanted to craft a vessel that didn't rely on that. I know some of you wanted the build for the airship, but you didn't know how to add the mod, so this was a nice workaround just in case you wanted the schematics. This boat will run without the mod. Now, to add on to the whole train tracks thing, if you've ever been to Disneyland, then you may know that there is a boat there, a big river boat. And that boat, it's not being steered by some captain. In fact, the boat is actually sitting on tracks. So basically, think of it like a train on water. We can give off the illusion that it's a boat by having the tracks submerged underneath the water. Now, at the time of the recording, this was just a going theory. I didn't actually know if the boat was going to run over the water, but thankfully it did, and this was a big breakthrough. It was finally time to start designing our vessel, and what better material to use than the buoyant material known as concrete? Did you actually think I was going to waste precious metals to build a boat? No! We're gonna make concrete using gravel, sand, and crushing wheels. Lots and lots of crushing wheels. Now, the reason I went to the gold factory was because you know how I said we needed lots of crushing wheels? Well, there were a bunch of crushing wheels there already, meaning that there was a bunch of sand being produced already. So I went to go gather some of that sand. I was hoping that there was gonna be a surplus of it, and it turns out that there really wasn't. All of that sand was still being produced into gold, and I just didn't know that the machine was that effective to the point where it left you with very little sand. So instead of cutting corners and using what we already had, I was just gonna have to design another machine that relied on even more crushing wheels. That's exactly what I did. This machine was going to be powered by these massive water wheels, and the reason we used the big water wheels was because they could handle more stress, and the stress capacity is what we needed to expand on if we wanted this whole machine to work. Thankfully, these wheels only required 1 bucket of water. Now it was time to bring this machine to life. Progress was being made. I even had to tinker with a rotational speed controller just so I could pinpoint the exact amount of RPM so that this thing would work. I toggled it down 1 level at a time until we finally found the perfect match. You want to play mod packs with friends, but you can't seem to find a good server. And the free ones? With the big mod packs these days, free servers are just too laggy. Luckily for you, there's BISECT hosting. They host my server, and with plenty of affordable options, they can host your server too. And the best part is, they support almost every mod pack. Use code Doublesal at checkout for 25% off your first order. BISECT hosting, a great site for great servers. With the crushing wheels now up and running, we were producing the perfect amount of gravel and sand. Now, we had to figure out exactly what colors we were going to use to dye our concrete. I was looking for specific colors. Black, white, yellow, gold, red. The reason I wanted this color scheme was because I wanted to mimic the paint designs of the old ocean liners. Yes, those were grand ships. But to do this, we were going to need a lot of flowers, and a lot of flowers requires a lot of bone meal, hence the reason why I'm in the Nether. You see, I was hoping to come across one of those soul sand valleys and find the fossils. You know, the ones made out of bone blocks. Although instead of a fossil, I found this structure. There was a chest and there were some bones, so I decided to explore further, thinking that if I found bones there, I could probably find even more if I went deeper. And it turns out I only found death. Lots of skeletons, so yeah, technically I did find bones, but they were kinda hostile. It was time for attempt number 2, and thankfully this one was more successful than the previous one. Only this time, instead of skeletons, I had to deal with ghosts. Now these ghosts, they were annoying. For some reason, they were just extremely bulky, and there were a bunch of them. But once I was able to kill a ghost, and I don't know how that works, ghosts are dead, aren't they? But like I said before, once I was able to kill the ghosts, I was able to harvest the bones, and then it was back to the work site, where I was attacked by even more ghosts! I don't know why they attacked me. I don't know what the deal is, but we finally had our flowers, and we finally had the means to duplicate them via bone meal. Check this out. Isn't that just amazing? I love that feature. Saves you so much time having to go pick flowers. Next we had to get charcoal because we needed to make black dye. Black dye was going to be the color of our ship's hull, and so we had to chop down a lot of trees because we were going to be burning a lot of wood. And once that was burned, we had our charcoal supply, and now we were free to make as much dye as we needed. I combined all the ingredients together to make the concrete powder, all those different colors, and then I threw them into the fan, which was now washing them with water, converting them into concrete blocks. I just love concrete blocks. Look how smooth they look. Now, it was finally time to start building our ship. The question is, how does one do that? I've never built a boat before. Strike that, that's a lie. I have built a boat before, but not one this small. Why? Because it's difficult. Now, some of you may be wondering, how can building a big boat be easier than building a small boat? Well, that's because the inspiration for the boat that I'm building has a lot of detail, and packing all of that detail into such a small build is difficult given the cube-like nature of Minecraft. Now, what boat did I base this off of? I was basing this off of the SS Nomadic. The Nomadic was known as a tender boat, which is basically a boat responsible for ferrying passengers and supplies from the land to the ship. The Titanic is way too big to dock at our boatyard, so we're gonna have the Nomadic to ferry us between the two. I hope you guys like the design. I tried to recreate it as best I could with the stuff I was given, but yeah. This is what the inside looks like, nothing fancy, and as for the controls, well, they're down here too. But let me show you how this works. The Nomadic is going to run on tracks. That we already know. The question is, how are we going to lay out these tracks? The idea was that we were going to make one big loop. The Nomadic was going to circle around. All we had to do was lay down the actual tracks to make that happen. Unfortunately, as soon as I assembled the ship to make it a movable entity, all of it came apart. So yeah, we're going to have to do without the lines, but I still think it looked good enough. Anyways, it was time to take her on the maiden voyage. The Nomadic pulled out of the dock and was sailing out into the open water. Well, at least a few feet away from the dock, but you know what? It still counts. Its first voyage was a success. Now, its loop was kind of small, but that's okay because we didn't want the Titanic to be that far out. We still wanted it to be within viewing distance. See the harbor over there? As for the Titanic, it was going to be right here next to Nomadic. All we had to do was build a little platform so that we could put our schematic cannon down and it would start building the thing. Wait a minute, did you actually think I was going to build the Titanic by hand? No way! The schematic cannon was going to do all the work as usual. I put the chests down, now it was simply a matter of supplying all of the materials to the cannon. Thankfully we had a lot of concrete. I transferred the schematic over, and I do want to let you know that the schematic is my design, and the cannon just started going. Look at the size of that hull. That thing is massive. It was a lot of blocks and it took a lot of time, but eventually the Titanic began taking shape. After some progress was made and some time had passed, you could actually get a feel for how big the ship was compared to the dock itself. This thing was a behemoth. By this point, some of the first boat decks were actually done, so we could actually walk on the ship. And yeah, this thing, I'm not going to furnish it. It's just way too large. I mean, look at it from the map. Look at it from the map. It barely fits into the ocean. It's a long run from one side to the other end of the ship, but you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. I started running all the way over there to the front, known as the bow. I even had to speed it up because that's how long it took. And yes, this is the bow, the front of the Titanic. Yes, it's still incomplete, but it's a work in progress. Even more time went by, and the schematic cannon continued to add more blocks to our ship. Eventually, our vessel was complete. Here's a quick little bird's eye view of the top. There she is with her 4 iconic smokestacks. Fun fact, the 4th one wasn't even real. And yes, here is the final view of the entire ship's length. It was massive. Also, I added the promenade deck, and as we zoom all the way through the length of the ship, this is what it looks like from the Nomadic itself. Yeah, it basically just overshadows the entire little boat. So I hopped on a smaller boat, and one thing I didn't consider was how exactly I was going to get to the top. So I had to add some ladders to the ship's hull, climbing each block one by one, and eventually I made it to the promenade deck. Now, where to start first? Well, how about the inside? There was no inside. If you want to download this build on Patreon, go ahead, furnish it yourself, because that's going to take me way too long if I tried that. But yeah. Here is the front of the ship in all of its glory. I tried to add as much detail as I possibly could, but you know what, like I said before, when you're building with Minecraft blocks, it is a little limiting. If you want more detail, you gotta amp up the scale. And here I'm going to recreate the iconic scene from that one movie, don't remember what it's called. Here it is, and why am I jumping like that? I've never seen that animation before. Well, it's time to continue the tour. Where to next? How about the upper boat deck where the lifeboats are? look at this. I think I spent most of my time designing this area. Here is the bridge where the ship was steered, and there are the Valkyrie and Sky engines because I tried to make this move, but the ship doesn't want to move. So yeah, that was an epic fail. The ship does not move. I do want to let you know that. So consider this as one giant build, just stationary. Also, the interior's all unfurnished, like I said before. Kind of a maze. I even get lost in there. And here, once again, you get a better view of the lifeboats. Do they lower? No. Will they? Yes, because we do need a way to get up and down the side of the ship, but more on that later. Just enjoy the beautiful views of the ship's funnels. And of course, I can't believe I almost forgot this part right here. The Titanic's iconic grand staircase. Not to scale, but you know what, when you do it in Minecraft, what are you gonna do? I even included the clock there. Anyways, that is the Titanic Grand Staircase right here. It's got the iconic glass dome, the staircase itself, and yeah. Oh, yeah, the inside of the ship. I almost forgot. That is, well, it is what it is. It's hollow, like I said before. And the reason we went through there was because I wanted to take a shortcut so that we could get back to the side of the boat here, because now it was time to design an elevator that could get us to the top boat deck. And how were we going to do that? Well, with the lifeboat, of course. Lifeboats were lowered, they can also be raised. So I designed a little lifeboat mechanism here. There's me setting it up. There are the gears, and I had to glue it all together because I wanted it to be one single entity, one platform. Once the glue was applied, it was time to design the elevator functions as well as the controls for it. There's the controls right there. That's going to allow us to go up and down. And of course, I have to add these redstone connectors so that the elevator knows where to stop. That's right there. And yeah, looks like it was time to give it a test, and it worked beautifully. Finally, we had a means of going up and down the side of our ship. It goes down, guess what? It even goes back up. All you have to do is go to the controls, press the button, and the lifeboat is raised once again to the top boat deck. Well, there you have it, friends, the Titanic in Minecraft form. With the help of our boat, we were able to build a ship that would be worthy of legend. And it is. There it is. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you want this build, be sure to follow me on Patreon. The schematic will be there available for download. Would you believe me if I told you that the secret to power was lots of eggs? Well, that's true. I wouldn't lie to you. And we're gonna need lots of cages for all those chickens who are gonna lay those eggs. Unfortunately, we have to go through the boring process of crafting said cages. So that's exactly what I did. Got some of my iron, some of my iron bars, and crafted some of the finest cages a chicken could ever want. After that, it was time to go searching for said chickens. So I made my way to the airport looking for the best mode of transportation, that being the gyrodyne. Airships, Titanic, they're cool, but they have nothing on the reliable gyrodyne. It's eco-friendly because it doesn't burn fuel, and well, it's just a fun word to say. Gyrodyne, gyrodyne, gyrodyne. Try saying that a bunch of times. Anyways, the gyrodyne took me to this village, and though this wasn't the chicken I was looking for, it was an airship, which made me believe that the villagers were evolving, ascending even, though they didn't have any loot worth taking. So after that, I decided to start flying along this wall of chunk. I guess my world was having some chunk glitches, considering that after every update they add new mods, which changes the world generation. I don't know, but I came across this treehouse hoping to find some chickens, and there wasn't a chicken to be seen, though there was a lot of watermelon and a lot of little XP stuff, but no chickens. I kept exploring around even to the bottom of the tree, but not a single bird. I flew a great distance until I finally came across the things I was looking for, my prized chickens. Yes, there was a beautiful hill, and on that hill were all of the chickens I needed. Just enough to get a chicken farm started. I even came across, well, oh, that's not a chicken, no thank you. Oh, and I also came across this little guy. He was coming home as well. Anyways, once I had my chickens, I decided to dig them a cozy little pit in the ground where I was going to have them breed until I had the perfect population for my power machine. Yes, these chickens were living the life, all the food they could eat and all the fun they could have. As for the raccoon, he was going to stay guard in his little cage. And watch as I break the laws of physics. I don't know how that works, but yeah, there you go. New home right there. Anyways, the reason we need eggs is because we're making blaze cakes, and one of the required ingredients for this cake is, of course, eggs. Now, to get us started, like I said before, we were going to need a lot of chickens, but we also needed a build site for our brand new power plant. Yes, we did have another power station that I built a few episodes ago, but that one ran on a different fuel, and this one was going to be way bigger and run purely on steam. So, to get that started, we were going to have to build the perfect chicken farm. Here I am setting up all the chutes so that all the eggs they were going to lay for our blaze cakes would go down into one tiny little chest. That chest would store all of the fuel that we were going to need to get this power plant started, a power plant that our world would depend on. After building the funnel system, I surrounded it with slabs so that I could have a little platform to walk around on just to monitor the chickens and their behavior. I made a little ladder, that way I could get up there, and then after that, the next goal was to craft some trap doors so that the chickens could have a nice little barricade to look through. Couldn't have them free roaming around. This was not that type of chicken farm. I got the barricades, I raised them up about 2 blocks, that way the chickens couldn't hop over, and then after that I began transferring each bird one by one via the cage. And in case you were wondering, this is what the funnels look like when they are in action. I climbed down to check the chest, and as you can see, even though we have a 3x3 grid, all the eggs were ending up in the one chest. Now it was time for the next thing. To make some cake, you are going to need some sugar. Thankfully, we had an abundance here at the cake factory. I grabbed some, and then I made my way back to the area where the chickens were to make an infinite water source because we were going to be growing more sugarcane for our beautiful sugarcane farm. And honestly, I don't know how many more of these I have to make, but it feels like I make them at least every other episode. Hopefully this is the last one, because after that, sugarcane, well, I mean, how much other use can we get from it? I put some trapdoors around to make it look nice, and once that was done, it was time to create the harvester. Speaking of making these things every other episode, we have our harvester here. I mean, it wouldn't be a Doublesal episode if we didn't make one. I added some glue. You guys know the drill. We've made this tons of times before. If you don't know how to make one by now, well, I don't know what to say. Anyways, the harvester was done, and here is where we're going to grind the sugarcane into sugar. You get a 50% chance to get an extra piece, and here is the minecart here. All we have to do is give it a little push, and the harvester starts doing its thing. Just going back and forth, harvesting infinite sugarcane, and it seems like we were set with the sugar, because once I switched that funnel to go outward, all the sugar dropped down into the millstone and ground up right there. Look at that, it's being stored in the chest. Of course, we have to increase our chicken population, like I've said before. Thankfully, I have lots of seeds, and they have a lot of time on their hands. Now that we have that, we need to tackle the next problem, netherrack, because we need cinder flour, the flour for our blaze cake. It only makes sense that blazes eat cakes made out of netherrack. I mean, what else would they eat? There was lots of netherrack in the power drill storage, the same drill that we had used last episode to clear out a mountain. Unfortunately, when I tried to collect the drill to move its inventory, the minecart didn't agree with me and moved forward. If I wanted to move this machine, there had to be a minecart with a furnace under it, and I tried crafting it, but my game was glitching and it was taking multiple tries. And then I realized my body temperature was rising, and also the fact that I was lacking a lever. I had to craft the lever, but I guess I don't know how to craft them until I did, and then after that I went back to the machine, placed the lever. Once it was one entity, I right-clicked it with my wrench, and I was finally able to get it in my inventory just in the nick of time before I burned and died of heat stroke. And that pool of water, that was just the thing I needed to cool off. After that, I went back to the worksite and began working with these large crushing wheels. We were going to need the crushing wheels to break up that netherrack into the fine cinder flour for our blaze cake. After that, I began installing the belts where all of the ingredients were going to go and meet in one spot at the center of a basin where they were going to be pressed or mixed together. There's the basin right there. All of our eggs, our flour, and our sugar, all of the ingredients needed to craft the ultimate power source, the blaze cake. Now, once that was done, I added the mixer that would combine all the ingredients together, and it was simply a matter of setting up the cogwheels and giving the machine life. I added these gearboxes, that way all of the conveyor belts went in the proper direction, can't have the ingredients going the wrong way, and once that was complete, it was simply a matter of checking out my work and making sure it looked good, and yes it did. Double check your work, everyone, especially when it comes to Minecraft builds. As you can see, the eggs were now on the belt, making their way to the basin. It was time to unleash the netherrack so that it could get crushed. So I stocked up the netherrack into the chest, and it immediately began going onto the belt, crushed into cinder flour. Once the netherrack was there, a creeper decided to make its appearance and blow up my work. So always be vigilant, especially during the day, because creepers, I hate them. But yes, all of the ingredients were being joined together, and I realized I had the wrong block. I needed a press, not a mixer, so I put a press there, and then the machine got overstressed. Once I resolved that issue, I tossed whatever extra ingredients I had in my inventory into the basin, and just let it get smushed together. And finally now, we had a working system that made us blaze cakes. Everything was working in harmony. The sugarcane was being harvested at a decent rate, the chickens were laying eggs at an okay rate, even though they were crammed. Yeah, everything was working as well as it could, but I'm sure we could fine-tune it a little more. But we need a building to house all this stuff, and the Temple of Power was that place to do it. I cleared the land and made sure it was nice and flat because we were going to be using our good old schematic cannon once again. What would we be without the schematic cannon to start building our tower? And I had to look at the bridge as reference there because I wanted everything to align up. Once I had my schematic, I just simply had to place down the preview, and this is the worst part of Create when you place down a huge preview because it makes your game lag. Spoiler, cover your eyes if you don't want to see what the building's going to look like because the preview, well, this is the building itself. There it is, oh, in all of its glory. Well, you know what, it could be a little more glorious, and it will be once everything is constructed. Now, it was time to start demolishing all of the old setups that we had because the building was so large it actually went over the stuff we had already placed. This stuff was going to end up getting buried if we didn't move it, so I moved it out and my cannon started doing its thing. Leave a comment down below if you want me to start building things by hand again, because if you think that this cannon spoils me, well, you and I are in agreement. I mean, honestly, half of the stuff we have, more than half, is thanks to the schematic cannon. So, yeah, you know what, maybe we should go back to building things by hand. But here was what it looked like when it was about, almost halfway done. Yes, the cannon is a beauty. As is the build, the power station was complete. Almost complete. You see, we still had to fit it in with all of the machines, but this is what the interior looks like before all that was done. We have a few entrances and exits, and lots of space for all the machines we want to build here. We have 2 identical halls on both sides of the building. We're definitely going to need them for the size of the sugarcane farm. And as you can see, these are our engines and the water that's going to power the engines. Well, the water that's going to course through the engines. It's the heat that powers them after all. And as you can see over here, I've decided that this is where I was going to put all of my stuff. And there's a friend that spawned right there. The water was going to fill these engines up. We had all the pumps and all the belts, everything to get this place going. There's the pipes there. And yeah, it was simply a matter of getting this place fitted out. But once it was set, this was going to be a literal powerhouse. The building could also act as a base of operations. As you can see, I have a few rooms over here, 2 on each end of the building, so you can, I don't know, store something here, make a bedroom, whatever you want. The space is there. And then we also have this fancy colonnade here, where when you actually get further away from the building, you can truly appreciate what it looks like. And I was going for a monumental type thing here. I always do. I don't know why, it's just something I love to build. And this is the side of the building with a large row of windows, and now it was time to move in. One of the first things I did was starting to get the engines warmed up. So I started by doing the water wheel placement here. After all, water wheels are a basic source of power, but they're essential for starting even the mightiest of power plants. After that, I began supplying the engines with fuel, that being the logs, which were being placed into the blaze burners by this mechanical arm, a true marvel of the Create mod. This is pretty cool, especially since we don't use it all that often. After that, the engine started coming to life, fluctuating between level 4 and level 5, with the arm supplying a steady flow of logs for them to burn, that being the blaze burners. Yes, the engine was moving, although it wasn't nearly as powerful as it could be. So it was up to me to harness the full potential of our steam engines, that being with the power of the blaze cake. I took all of the setup we had previously made and moved it inside. I even installed the netherrack grinder right underneath for the sake of saving some space. Yes, everything was going to run perfectly, although it was a little dark, so I did add some lamps so that we could see our beautiful creation. The chickens were laying tons of eggs at the old farm, and I didn't want them to go to waste, so I transferred them over to the new machine along with all of the sugar that we had also harvested. I applied the eggs on the funnels, that way we could sort out all the random eggs with the good eggs. Then after that, I made a chute so that all of the cinder flour could go up into the basin, which was directly above it on the main floor. and now it was simply time to let all the ingredients start moving between every component of our design. The sugar cane was being grounded into sugar, and our eggs were moving through, making their way to the basin where they were going to be mixed together with the sugar cane and all that other junk. All in all, our setup was about, I'd say, 99% complete, although there was one last ingredient we needed to make this blaze cake, and that was the lava layer of frosting. Yeah, I think that's what the lava's supposed to be. So we were going to get our lava from our lava farm that we had at the workshop, and we had to basically pipe it all the way over to the power station, which meant I was going to have to drill a very long tunnel. Thankfully, I did have this drill that could mine in a 3x3 radius, so it only took half the time. And as you can see here, it was a very long process. But once the tunnel was done, I was free to place down the longest pipeline I had ever built on this world, paired with lots of cogs and lots of shafts to give it power so that all of the lava can flow from point A to point B. Now, there were a few glitches, and that's to be expected when you're pumping so much lava at such a long distance. But once you're able to work around those glitches, thank you Reddit for helping me out, you are able to get the lava to your blaze cake base and make a beautiful stack of blaze cakes. Once I fed them to the blaze burners, they turned blue, indicating that the heat was being cranked up, which also meant that the engines were starting to work as they should. Max power, you can tell by the cogs spinning really fast. We could also moderate how much water was going in. As you can see, the engines were maxed out because there was all the water and heat mixing together, but it also began to lower because I adjusted the RPM. But with the speed controller, I raised it from 80 RPM to 90, and it maxed out again, so yeah, the more RPM, the more power you get. As for the netherrack, well, as you can see, we were bottlenecking here because we needed more netherrack, so I built a portal, went to the nether, and I got access to the drill, which had plenty of power that would mine us more netherrack, although I was attacked by some pigs, very annoying. And once it was done harvesting the netherrack I needed, I placed it down in the overworld so as to avoid getting killed by the pigs, and collected all the blocks I needed. And that solved the bottleneck issue. But yeah, let's go over the entire process one more time. So, we start here at the sugarcane farm. Sugarcane is collected by the harvester and transported into these chutes. The sugarcane drops down. Then after that, we have to sort it into two categories: silver sugarcane and gold sugarcane. They're no good, they won't get grounded up. But once they're separated, they're ground into sugar itself. The sugar goes down the belt where it's stored, and now for the chickens. Happiest chickens on earth. The chickens lay lots of eggs, which go down the chute. Those are sorted as well. We sort out all the tiered eggs. And as for the regular eggs, they continue down the belt, and after that we move down to the cinder flour area. It begins with netherrack being ground up by crushing wheels into cinder flour, and then the cinder flour is elevated via chutes and a fan into the basin, where they're pressed together to make a blaze cake base, and then filled with lava to make the blaze cake itself. After that, the cake is transported to the mechanical arm that feeds each blaze burner a blaze cake. Once they turn blue, that means you have lots of power, although you may notice that the meter is not where it should be. That's because you need more water. Thankfully, we have pumps, although the pumps aren't pumping enough water at a fast enough rate. So that's where we have to raise the RPM, and once the RPM is raised, the pumps have more rotational force, allowing them to put more water into the tanks, and once the water goes into the tank, the machines come to life. And you're probably wondering how we use all that power. Well, on the outside we have all of these belts moving around, and that's where you would basically plug your machine in. Voila, the power station. I also did a little landscaping outside, made a path, added some bushes on each side with some flowers, just to make things nice. We're gonna make beautiful things in this area, and thanks to our power station, that is now possible. In the last video, we made this glorious power plant, a place to harvest all the power we needed to create any factory we wanted. Now the question remains, what kind of factory do we want to build next? Well, how about this TNT factory, suggested by this subscriber? Yes, everybody loves TNT. It's explosive, it's exciting, and it's expensive. But in today's video, we're going to do everything we need to start taking the first steps towards our automated TNT. To make TNT, you need two simple ingredients: sand, which is easy, and gunpowder, which is not so easy. To make gunpowder, you have to have nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. Now, charcoal we can come by easily, but nitrate and sulfur, well, there's a process to follow. For example, if we want to get nitrate, we have to gather lots of sandstone, and I'm talking stacks. You take the sandstone, you throw it into this grinding machine, the sandstone is broken up, and you get sand as well as nitrate. Well, this machine uses lots of power. Thankfully, we did have a generator to generate all that power, so once it was juiced up, we were getting lots of sand and all the nitrate we needed. That's one thing to check off our list. Next, we have to worry about sulfur, but not until I add a new weapon to my arsenal. This brand new weapon was going to be powerful. It was going to be just what we needed to make our journey to the Nether that much safer. That's right, we're going to the Nether for sulfur. I tested it a couple of times, and then I made the determination that this was exactly what I needed if I was going to make my journey safely across the Nether. Now, what was my goal there? To find another fortress. Reason being was because we needed blaze rods, and blaze rods can only be gathered from blazes, which of course spawn in those fortresses. So with this new weapon of mine, I was going to stop at nothing until I had a steady source of blaze rods. I carefully maneuvered my craft through the Nether, trying not to hit anything. Finally, I laid eyes on the fortress, as well as the many enemies who were waiting to destroy me. Thankfully, I came prepared. I began clearing out each enemy one by one, and after that ordeal, I went looking for a blaze spawner, the source of my blaze rods. Thankfully, that didn't take long, and now it was simply a matter of safely gathering them. Now, there were a few processes I could go about, but the main idea was to transfer them from the spawner all the way back to the portal. Didn't want to have to make the long trip in between, so I needed a system that was going to work. I took one of the blaze rods I had collected and threw it into the grinder. It was crushed up, and out came the blaze powder as well as the sulfur we needed. But we still needed a lot more. Thankfully, I had a plan that involved the train station, and at the train station, I was going to build a portal. Now, Doublesal, why would you build a portal at the train station? Well, that's because we're building a brand new stop on our railway line, the Nether Station. And this Nether Station was going to act as the main point of transportation to every other area in this dimension. Granted, this station was going to be small, but you know what? It's the Nether, and we're not trying to go too big without getting ourselves blown up in the process. So that's exactly what I did. I began constructing a small little hub where I could safely come and go as I wanted without getting killed. Now, the Nether is a very dangerous place, and building with anything except cobblestone is extremely risky, as you run the chance of getting blown up by a ghast. Now, in case you didn't know, ghasts can blow up everything except cobblestone and obsidian. I wasn't going to use obsidian, and cobblestone is an ugly block to build with, so I had to be fast, I had to be alert, and if you're not alert, this happens. An assault by multiple ghasts on multiple fronts, blowing up all of your hard work right in front of your eyes. That's why you have to come prepared with a proper weapon. I quickly began building the roof and the walls because once the ghasts don't see you anymore, then well, they're not a problem. I also collected some glowstone to start lighting up the area to prevent other unwanted guests from spawning. Once all my materials were collected and my blocks were placed, I finally had a nice little place I could call, well, I guess I missed a spot. I swear, we can't have nice things in the Nether. I hate it here. Oh well. Anyways, back to work. This is what it looks like when it's not being invaded by enemy. I spoke too soon. Please go away. When the dust had settled, I went back to work adding the finishing touches to this Nether hub, and then after that, I began working on the next important feature, an elevator. One that went to the bottom depths of the Nether so that we wouldn't have to worry about the enemies of the surface bothering us like you had just witnessed prior. I even built a little tube so that we could safely descend on the elevator. I had a little bread break, and then it was finally time to take this elevator for a test ride. I glued it all together, clicked the elevator block, I pressed the button, and then me and my little friend descended down to the depths of the worst place in Minecraft. But you gotta admit, when you're looking through the glass, it is very pretty. At least when you're not getting killed by everything that lives here. That's why we have safety precautions like this tube. Anyways, once we got to the bottom, it was time to keep working on the subway. We had finished the elevator, we had finished the entrance, and now we actually had to get started on the train system itself. So, to get started on that, I went back to the surface to go grab a very important tool, but not before I planted some lava as well as some soul soil to grow something essential. I planted some soul sprouts which I put in my soul lamp which kept me from overheating. I then made a detour to the overworld where all of a sudden I saw that my power plant was being assaulted by these dragons. They were included in an update for the mod pack, and they gave me a great idea, one that I would act on later. But in the meantime, it was my job to destroy them before they destroyed me. And once that was taken care of, it was time to go back to the Nether to act on the next big step. We needed to drill a hole. Not just any hole, a very long tunnel that would allow our train to sweep safely through the terrain of the Nether. Although you do have to watch out for those underground lava pockets. Yes, the tunnel continued to grow longer and longer, and eventually we reached the end of the line, so that was the point where I decided to start laying down the tracks. I even decided to use a brand new block, brand new to me at least, and it stopped the train immediately before it went into that lava. Thanks to the tunnel, I was now closer to the Nether Fortress. I laid down the rest of the tracks, and then the next step was to start building the train. And as always, I had to start by building a little test platform just to make sure that I remembered how to build one of these properly. I glued the test platform together, and then it was simply a matter of testing its speed in this long tunnel. I just wanted to get a feel for how long it would take to make one trip from point A to point B, and I gotta admit, it was a lot faster than I thought it'd be. I had to make sure I didn't fall off or this train was gonna leave me behind. It just steamrolled through those poor zombie pigmen. It didn't take long before I reached the end of the tunnel, as well as the stop for the Nether Fortress. I already carved the platform in the inside of the wall, and then on my way back, the train slipped right under my feet and left me behind. Eventually, I was able to catch up, and once I did that, I added a second cart, a crucial add-on to our Nether train. I even cleaned up the platform for the starting point of our Nether Subway. Now back to the second cart. This was gonna hold the vault. Now, the vault is a very important block in the Create mod. Basically, it acts as a storage block, kind of like a chest, except you can't access it unless you're using Create mod blocks, like funnels. So that was exactly what we needed because unlike a chest, the vault had so much more storage space, it could be moved, which was perfect for trains, and we could load and unload it at each stop. I went back to the hub to harvest some soul sprouts because my lamp was getting low and I was gonna start burning up. And the way you can tell if they actually have sprouts, well, you see that one only had stems. But this one, the little blue bulbs, that one has lots of sprouts to harvest. Thanks to those plants, my time in the Nether was extended, which meant I could work more on the trains, like adding these portable storage interfaces. The block that allows you to move items from contraption to contraption. Here's a demonstration on how it's gonna work. For example, we're gonna put a torch on the belt here, and then I also happen to have this mechanical arm. The torch goes into the funnel, into the block. Let's throw in some slabs for good measure. Slabs go in as well, and the idea is that they're supposed to transfer into the vault, which they did. And yeah, they're in the train now. But we're not here to transfer slabs, we're here to transfer blaze rods. And the blaze rods are up on the surface, so I had to dig a staircase that led me up. Eventually I reached the fortress, and after that, I had to start devising a system that would allow me to transfer the blaze rods from the spawner to the tunnel underground. I began building a safety barrier that would protect me from the blazes that didn't want me to harvest their items. Unfortunately, they were no match for the power of the Minecraft block. With my safety barrier slowly taking shape, the blazes were eager to eliminate me, but there was nothing they could do to stop what was coming. Eventually, I began dismantling the blocks around their spawner so that I could begin constructing a blaze grinder. But that proved to be a little difficult given that the blazes were not keen on me destroying their home. I had to fall back. But I triumphantly returned with a potion of fire resistance, so I was immune to whatever attacks they had for me. I converted their home into a grinder with conveyor belts and all the other bells and whistles. It was a very humane design, and they were going to be punched to death with this deployer. And all of this mechanical wonder was powered by a mechanical windmill. Yes, it was all coming together, although I did have to make a glass barrier around my workstation because I was still getting attacked by the other blazes who didn't like what I was doing to their brothers. And once that barrier was done, I was finally allowed to work in peace, which meant I could start adding more mechanical belts to start transferring the items from point A to point B, from the spawner to the station. I force-loaded the chunks so that my machines kept working, and I even installed a custom mod so that the scarecrow there acted as an entity, allowing more blazes to spawn. Yes, this system was full of innovations, and my items were being produced at an excellent rate. They went down the belt and through the tunnel until they came face to face with the chute. I added a funnel for the items to pass through, and once they entered the chute, they would drop all the way down underground to the tunnel I had made. It was a long fall, but once they reached the bottom, they would enter the second mechanical belt, which took them all the way to the train station. Speaking of the train station, it was time to beautify this area. Lots of sandstone slabs and a lot of stone slabs. I didn't want to go with another aesthetic because it was way too dark, and as you can see by my screen, it's already hard to see as it is. So some nice bright sandstone was just what I needed to illuminate the place. I went with this nice classical design, and by that point, enough time had passed to the point where my chest was almost full not of blaze rods, but of these little XP cubes. Now, these XP cubes could be right-clicked and they would convert into XP, but you could also turn them into liquid, which meant that the experience itself could be stored in these fluid tanks. So, to save some space in that chest, that's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to convert the XP cubes into this fluid that I would store in the tank and extract whenever I needed some extra XP, which is kind of rare, but it's still nice to have. The tank was done, I carved a tunnel for easy access, and then I began setting up the funnel and drainage system, allowing the cubes to go into the tank itself. Now, I thought the setup was ready, I let the items flow out, but for some reason they weren't going into the drain. I then realized I used the wrong block. Instead of a drain, I needed a disenchanter, and those look very similar, but once I swapped it out for the right block, as you can see, the cubes went in, and they started filling up the tank. Yes, it was XP on demand. As for the train itself, it was time to start building it, and do you remember those lizards? They were going to be the inspiration for the ultimate dragon-themed train. Or a serpent. Or a naga, I don't know, but it's a big reptilian-looking monster, and it fit the vibe of the Nether perfectly, because as we know, the Nether is full of monstrosities. This train would be no exception, but it was also going to have utility, that being transferring all of our blaze rods. Our train station was finally complete, and now it was finally time to take the brand new train for a test drive, but not before I show you its interior. This is one of the passenger cars with a matching blue cushion set up here that matches the entire bluish vibe of this train. Nice and cozy, although it is kind of dark. Maybe we'll add some lights later. And yeah, this is another passenger car. It looks identical to the last one I showed you, and as for the control room, well, it's pretty much the same setup as when we set that little test train up. So yeah, all I had to do was assemble it, and the train came to life. One big entity, ready to go from point A to point B. And check out this little feature. You've seen this before, but not on the trains. When I move the train, the doors close, and when I park the train at the tracks, the doors open again. Little details like that go a long way, and I really appreciate the creators for adding such a small but delightful feature. Now, let's get this train moving. Something about the vibe of the train while we were moving through the dark tunnel of the Nether, I don't know what it was, but it was just kind of relaxing. I had finally reached my destination, and now it was time to show you what I worked on here. Same design as the last station. This one was a little different. The changes so minor you can't even notice, but yeah, overall, same design. Now, it was time to construct the last mechanism of today's video, a water wheel system. Now, what were these wheels gonna power? Well, we had a whole setup over here. This is where we were gonna offload the train. But like I said, none of the system works unless we have power. But how can you use water wheels if you can't put water in the Nether? Well, you can use lava. I had no idea this worked. I just tried it out and the wheel started spinning, so I wasn't gonna question how wooden water wheels weren't being incinerated by lava. Our shipping system was finally complete, and now it was time to take our transportation system back to the Nether Fortress so that we could begin loading our precious cargo for future use, that being the TNT. And there was a huge backlog of materials over here because the chunks weren't loaded, so when I got there, well, you can see the results. They entered in at point A and exited out through point B. Yes, everything was going exactly as it should. Blaze rods were being transported, and now we could start production of sulfur. So, let's go over one more time. Beautiful Nether hub, although we have these annoying Nether creatures that insist on spawning, don't know what to do there. And yeah, it's kind of pretty. But the purpose of this hub is to take us down to the depths where we have our Nether Subway. Thankfully, we can enjoy the scenery while we take the long ride down. Beautiful Nether. And here it is, the station. Alright, after that you enter the train and you get to the Nether Fortress station. And at the Nether Fortress station, lots of stuff going on here. Not only is this where we load our cargo, but it's also the site of our fortress itself, a key element in this entire system. Because inside the fortress we have our state-of-the-art blaze grinder. Blazes spawn, they get killed by the deployer, and then they drop the blaze rods which go onto the assembly line, and they take the long trip all the way to the station. Once all those items are there, we separate them. XP goes into one funnel and comes out the other end as liquefied XP, which we store in this vat right here. It just accumulates until we need XP. Next, we have our blaze rods, which are also separated, and one of the little tweaks I made was that the blaze rods do come out in stacks. Now, you don't have to do that, but it is certainly faster than offloading them one by one. So yeah, there's just a free little tip for you. They go into the portable storage interface, which puts them inside the train, and then once inside the train, they make the trip back to the first Nether hub, where they are then unloaded, ready for use, all powered by lava water wheels. There it is, friends, our entire transportation system. I think it's safe to say that we are one step closer to automating TNT. Now that we have a steady production of sulfur, we just need to automate the nitrate and charcoal process and we'll be good to go. Gunpowder is on the way. And if you want to see me make a TNT factory, as well as many more marvelous creations, then I highly recommend that you click subscribe, leave a like, and let me know what you thought about the video in the comments down below. This was a wonderful run here in the steampunk world, and there is way more to come. So to wrap it all up, let's take a little aerial tour of everything we've built over the course of these last 1,000 days. From our fancy district, all the way to our airport, and of course we can't forget about our beautiful ocean liner, the Titanic. Yes, this steampunk world is probably my favorite Minecraft world of all the ones I've created. And here's a sneak peek of what's coming next. Only bigger and better things are yet to come. And honestly, seeing as how you guys love this series so much, I want to keep it going for as long as possible. So yes, your support is greatly appreciated. Hopefully I have another 1,000 days in me because it does take a long time to make, but your patience is appreciated as well. That is going to be it for today's video. If you liked any of the builds you saw today and you want them in your world, they are available for download on Patreon. Your support is greatly appreciated. If there's anything you want me to build specifically, be sure to comment down below. That way I can put it in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. This has been Doublesal. Have a fantastic day.